You're going to smile, stand next to me, and not say a single word unless I ask you to. That was the first thing Wubin ever said to me. Not hello, not nice to meet you, not even a fake pleasantry wrapped in corporate politeness. Just that, flat, quiet, and absolute, delivered while he straightened his cufflinks without looking at me once. I remember thinking, who does that? I also remember not saying it out loud, which probably saved me a lot of trouble. My name is Grace Okafor, and 3 weeks before that moment, I had been a perfectly unremarkable paralegal at Hartwell & Associates in downtown Chicago, spending my lunch breaks eating sad desk salads and filing discovery documents nobody ever fully read. I had a studio apartment in Logan Square that smelled like old radiator heat in winter, a cat named Bernard who hated me with consistent dedication, and a student loan balance I had genuinely stopped opening emails about. I was no one's first choice for anything dramatic. And then Marcus happened. Marcus, my manager, my mentor, the man who had spent 2 years convincing me I was lucky to have him guiding my career, had apparently also been spending those same 2 years funneling money through a series of shell accounts that, through a paper trail so convoluted it took me 3 days to accidentally untangle it, connected back to a private investment group that belonged, at least partially, to a man named Wubin Kwan. I hadn't meant to find it. That's the thing nobody believed when I tried to explain it later. I was just cross-referencing billing records. I was just doing my job. But Marcus saw me pull the second set of files, and the way his face changed. That brief, terrible stillness told me everything I needed to know about how much danger I had just stepped into. He was gone from the office the next morning. No notice, no explanation, no desk plants collected. Just gone. And that afternoon, a man I had never seen before was waiting outside my apartment building. He didn't threaten me. He didn't even speak. He just handed me a card with an address and the words, "Mr. Kwan requests a conversation," printed in clean, serif font, and then walked away, like that was a completely normal thing to do. I went. I still don't have a fully satisfying explanation for why. The address led to a private dining room on the 42nd floor of a building in the West Loop that wasn't listed anywhere I could find online. The elevator required a keycard I was given at the lobby by a security guard who looked at me with the specific kind of blankness that meant he had been trained to look at everyone that way, regardless of whether he recognized them. Wubin was already seated when I arrived. I noticed the tattoos first. They crawled up his neck in dense, intricate patterns that disappeared into the collar of his white shirt, which was open at the throat. His suit was black and clearly expensive in a way that didn't need to announce itself. He was younger than I expected. Maybe 30, 32 at most, with a face that was almost unsettlingly composed. Not relaxed, not tense, just contained, like someone who had spent years deciding exactly how much of himself to show, and had arrived at a very precise number. He didn't stand when I walked in. He looked at me the way you look at something you've already made a decision about. "Sit down, Ms. Okafor," he said. His English was perfect. No detectable accent except a faint formality in the way he structured sentences, like someone who had learned the language through books before he ever heard it spoken casually. I sat. There were 2 other men in the room, stationed near the door, neither of them looking at me specifically, both of them somehow looking at everything. I had never been in a room with bodyguards before. I noticed I kept tracking them in my peripheral vision without meaning to, which made it hard to focus on the man actually speaking to me. "You found something that wasn't meant to be found," Wubin said. It wasn't a question. I wasn't looking for it. "I know." He picked up the glass of water in front of him, took one slow sip, set it down. "That doesn't change what you know." "I don't know anything," I said, and I heard how my voice nearly held steady. Nearly. "I saw some numbers. I don't have any context for what they mean." He looked at me for a moment without speaking. Not menacingly. Just measuring. like he was recalibrating something internal. It was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "Marcus Lee has been stealing from me for 14 months, he said. "Approximately $2.3 million routed through your firm's billing infrastructure." A pause. The people he was stealing for are not the kind of people who let that kind of thing resolve quietly. The room felt colder. Or maybe I was just now noticing that it had always been cold. "What does that have to do with me?" "They know you found the records." His voice didn't change at all. "They'll assume you know more than you do. Or they'll decide it doesn't matter what you actually know." I pressed my palms flat against my thighs under the table. "Don't show it. Don't show it." "So, what are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Both guards shifted almost imperceptibly, then stilled again when they saw what he was doing, and placed a small folder on the table. He slid it across to me without ceremony. "I'm proposing something specific. You'll need to read it before you respond." I opened it. It took me a moment to understand what I was reading, then another moment to understand that I had understood it correctly the first time, then a longer moment to just sit there in the particular silence of someone whose brain has decided to temporarily refuse new information. A marriage certificate. Blank. Both signature lines visible. "This is insane," I said. "It's practical." He looked almost bored saying it, which made it worse somehow. "My presence in Chicago requires a certain amount of legitimate social infrastructure. Events, introductions, the appearance of a settled personal life. It reduces surveillance attention considerably." He paused. "You need to disappear from your current life long enough for the people looking at you to redirect their attention. A new name, a new address, a new context. This provides both." "You want me to marry you?" "On paper," he said. "Nothing more." I laughed. It came out wrong. Too high, too short. The kind of laugh that isn't actually a response to anything funny. "For how long?" "As long as necessary." He folded his hands on the table. His knuckles, I noticed, carried faint scars. Not the kind from accidents. "You'll be compensated. You'll be protected. When it ends, you'll have enough to start over wherever you choose. And if I say no?" The question landed and sat there between us. He didn't fill the silence right away, which was its own kind of answer. "Then you leave this building," he said finally, "and you manage your situation independently." He said it without threat. That was the most frightening part. There was no threat because there didn't need to be. He was just describing the world as it was. I looked down at the blank certificate again. I thought about Marcus's face going still when he saw me with the files. I thought about the fact that someone had known where I lived. I thought about Bernard the cat, who hated me, and my radiator-scented apartment, and the student loan emails I had been ignoring. I thought about how normal my life had been 72 hours ago. "I need 24 hours, I said. "You have 12, Wubin said. And then he picked up his phone, and the meeting, apparently, was over. I took 11.5 of those hours to sit in a diner on Milwaukee Avenue and stare at a coffee I kept refilling and never finishing. I called my sister Adheres in Atlanta and told her nothing useful. I walked home at 2 a.m. past the Korean BBQ place that was still open and smelled like smoke and sesame and something I couldn't name, and I stood outside my own building for a long time looking at the lit window of my apartment on the 3rd floor. Then I went upstairs, fed Bernard, packed one bag, and called the number on the card. I don't know what I expected the next morning to look like. Something transactional, probably. Paperwork, a handshake. Instead, there was a car waiting at 7 a.m. A brief and wordless drive to a courthouse I had never been to. A clerk who looked at us with the practiced neutrality of a woman who had signed off on Stranger Things. And then, faster than I could process it, a certificate with my name next to his. Grace Kwan. I stood in the courthouse hallway afterward and stared at the words. Wubin was already walking toward the exit. He paused without turning around. "The car will take you to the new apartment," he said. "There's a list of what you need to know on the kitchen counter. Read it today." "That's it?" I said. "No, I don't know. Instructions? Rules?" He turned then, just slightly, and looked at me over his shoulder with an expression I couldn't categorize. Not cold, not warm. Something that existed in the narrow space between them. "One rule," he said. "Don't lie to me." Then he walked out the door into the gray Chicago morning, and his guards fell into step around him like water closing over a stone, and I was left standing in a hallway that smelled like old carpet and bureaucracy, holding a copy of a marriage certificate with both our names on it. Fake, I told myself. This is fake. You know exactly what this is. I folded the paper carefully and put it in my bag. I didn't quite believe myself. The apartment was on the 19th floor of a building in River North that had a doorman who greeted me by name before I had introduced myself to anyone. That was the first moment it truly landed. Not the courthouse, not the certificate, not even Wubin's voice telling me not to lie to him. It was a doorman saying, "Good morning, Mrs. Kwan," with complete, practiced ease, like I had been living there for years, like my name had always been that, like none of this was the most disorienting thing that had ever happened to me on a Tuesday. "Thank you," I said, "because what else do you say?" The apartment was large in the particular way that feels intentional rather than accidental. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the river, furniture that was expensive without being loud about it. Neutral tones, clean lines, nothing personal anywhere. No photographs, no clutter, no evidence of a life being lived. It felt like a stage set that had been assembled quickly and with precision for a specific purpose. On the kitchen counter, as promised, a single sheet of paper. I stood there in my coat and read it. Building security has your biometrics. Do not give your access code to anyone. Your phone has been replaced. The new one is on the counter. Do not contact anyone from your previous life from your old number. A schedule of engagements will be sent weekly. Learn what you can about Korean business customs. If anyone asks, we met 2 years ago through mutual friends in New York. We have been private about the relationship. That is all you need to say. That was it. No signature. No please or thank you anywhere in the document. I put the paper down and looked out at the river for a long time. Then I found the new phone, sat on the floor with my back against the kitchen island. The couch felt too formal for the kind of crisis I was having. And I started reading everything I could find about a man named Wubin Kwan, which, it turned out, was almost nothing. There were a few mentions in trade publications, a name attached to an investment group. One photograph, grainy and clearly taken from a distance, of him entering a building somewhere in Los Angeles. No interviews, no social media, no profiles. It was the kind of absence that wasn't accidental. It was the absence of someone who had worked very deliberately to stay invisible. I set the phone down on my knee. Who did I just marry? The first event was 4 days later, a private dinner at a restaurant in the Gold Coast. One of those places with no sign outside, where reservations required knowing the right person to call. I wore a dark green dress I found hanging in the closet of the apartment's second bedroom, which I was choosing not to read too deeply into, and spent 40 minutes in front of the bathroom mirror reminding myself how to look like someone who was not actively panicking. Wubin arrived at the restaurant at the same time I did, from a different car. He looked at me once when I stepped out, a single brief assessment that traveled from my shoes to my face and didn't linger anywhere, and said nothing. Then his hand was at the small of my back, light enough to be almost impersonal, and we were walking inside together. The pressure of his hand through the fabric was the most contact we had made since signing a legal document next to each other. The dinner was 12 people around an oval table. Business, mostly. I understood about a third of what was discussed. recognized a few names from Chicago real estate and finance circles, and spent the rest of the time performing the specific kind of attentive quietness the note had instructed me toward. Smile. Don't speak unless asked. I was good at being underestimated. I had been practicing it my whole professional life. What I hadn't been prepared for was the way the other people at the table treated Wubin. Not with fear, exactly. It was subtler than that. A kind of careful deference that looked like respect, until you noticed how consistent it was. How nobody interrupted him. How a man 3 times his age waited for Wubin to finish speaking before responding. How conversations seemed to subtly reorganize themselves around wherever his attention was directed, like plants turning toward light. He never raised his voice. He barely moved. He ate with unhurried composure and asked precisely chosen questions and offered opinions sparingly, and the room rearranged itself around him anyway. I watched this from beside him and felt something shift in my understanding of what I had agreed to. Halfway through the 3rd course, the man to my left, Holt, some kind of developer, the kind who wore his money loudly, leaned toward me with the particular ease of someone who assumed his interest would be welcome. "So how long have you and Wubin been?" 2 years, I said. Smooth, practiced. I had been rehearsing it. He smiled in a way I didn't love. He kept you very quiet. "He's a private person," I said. I respected that. Holt was about to say something else. His eyes had drifted in a way I recognized and disliked. When I felt it. Not a sound, not a word. Just a shift in the air beside me. A drop in temperature that wasn't physical. And then Wubin's hand was on the table near mine, not touching. Just there. And he had turned his head toward Holt with an expression so neutral it was its own kind of statement. Holt straightened, picked up his wine glass, changed the subject to something about a development project in Fulton Market. I kept my eyes forward and said nothing. Under the table, very slowly, I uncurled the fist I hadn't realized I'd made. We didn't speak in the car on the way back. I sat on one side, he sat on the other, and the Chicago night moved past the windows in smears of yellow and white. I was exhausted in the specific way that comes from spending 3 hours performing composure. Every muscle tired from holding a shape. "You did well," Wubin said, without looking away from the window. I didn't know what to do with that. "Thank you," felt strange. "I know," felt presumptuous. So I said nothing, and after a moment he didn't seem to expect me to. But then, Holt. "It was fine," I said. "I know." A pause. "It won't happen again." The certainty in his voice, not angry, not possessive in any way I recognized from normal human interactions, just absolute, settled into the car like a fact about the weather. I looked at his profile in the passing light. The clean line of his jaw, the tattoos disappearing into his collar. "What does that mean?" I wanted to ask. "What exactly are you saying when you say that?" I didn't ask. The car pulled up to my building and I reached for the door handle. Grace. My name in his voice was different than I expected. Not softer exactly. Just more deliberate. Like he had thought about the syllables before releasing them. I turned. "The people who were watching you," he said. "They've redirected. For now." He held my gaze steadily. "Stay inside this week unless you're with me or the car." "For how long?" "Until I tell you otherwise." I wanted to push back on that. I felt the resistance rise in me. The automatic refusal of someone who had spent her whole adult life making her own decisions, accountable to nobody, moving through the world under her own power. "You don't get to tell me." But I thought about Marcus's face, the card with the address, the doorman who had known my name. "Okay," I said. Something in his expression shifted. Barely, so briefly I almost missed it. Not surprise. something quieter than surprise. I got out of the car before I could study it further. The week inside was strange. Not badly strange, which was itself strange to admit. I worked remotely. I had taken a leave from Hartwell before any of this fully unraveled. A decision that had felt cowardly at the time, and now felt like the only intelligent thing I had done. And I spent long afternoons reading at the window, watching the river change color through the day. I cooked things I had no time to cook in my old apartment. I slept more than I had in 2 years. On Wednesday, a package arrived. No note, just a book. A history of Korean art. Thick and beautifully illustrated, with certain pages marked with small paper clips. I sat with it for the entire evening. On Thursday, Woobin appeared at the apartment unannounced at 7 p.m. I opened the door and he was simply there. 2 guards visible in the hallway behind him, wearing a different suit, holding nothing, looking at me the way he always looked at me, like he was recalibrating something. "I didn't know you were coming," I said. "I should have called," he said. It was such a normal thing to say that it briefly disoriented me. "Come in," I said, because there was nothing else to do. He came in. He stood by the windows looking out at the river, the same view I had been staring at for 3 days, and was silent long enough that I went to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water out of pure nervous habit, and then felt ridiculous holding them. "Is something wrong?" I asked. "No." He turned from the window. "There's another event Saturday, a charity gala in Streeterville." He paused. "It will be more visible than the dinner. More people who will ask questions." "I can handle questions." He looked at me. "I know you can." The way he said it, not like a compliment exactly, more like an observation he'd made and filed, was different from how anyone had spoken to me in a long time. Not managed, not softened, just direct. I set one of the glasses on the counter. Woobin. It was the first time I had used his name. I saw it register. That slight recalibration again. "Is there anything I should actually be worried about Saturday? Tell me the truth." He was quiet for a moment. "There will be someone there," he said, "who I haven't dealt with completely. He may try to speak with you." "To do what?" "To understand what you know." His voice was even. "Or to make you uncomfortable enough to be useful to him." The room was very quiet. "And what do I do if he approaches me?" "You stay close to me," Woobin said. "Not a request, not quite a command. Something in between. Something that assumed I already understood the logic of it, even if I was still getting used to what the logic meant." I nodded slowly. He picked up the second glass of water I'd set on the counter, the one I'd poured for no reason, took a sip, and set it back down. Then he left. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after, looking at the glass he had touched, and tried to figure out why my heart rate still hadn't returned to normal. Fake, I reminded myself. This is still fake. The word was starting to feel less certain than it had a week ago. The gala was held in a building that had once been a historic bank, one of those grand, cavernous spaces with marble floors and ceilings so high they made sound behave differently, everything echoing just slightly too long, like the room itself was reluctant to let go of what was said inside it. I noticed the ceiling first, then the flowers, white arrangements so large they looked architectural. Then the people, hundreds of them in formal clothes, moving in that particular way that expensive rooms produce, slow and deliberate, as if everyone had silently agreed that urgency was vulgar. And then I noticed how the room changed when Woobin walked in. It wasn't dramatic. No heads turned all at once, no conversations stopped. It was more like a current shifting direction underwater. Subtle, systemic, felt before it was seen. Eyes moving without moving, obviously. Postures adjusting. A man near the entrance said something to the woman beside him, and she looked over her shoulder in our direction, and then looked away too quickly. Woobin noticed none of it, or seemed not to. He moved through the room with the same contained, unhurried presence he carried everywhere. His hand at my back again. More deliberate tonight than it had been at the dinner, I thought. Though I couldn't have said exactly why I thought that. "There's a table reserved near the east wall," he said quietly, close enough that I could feel his voice more than hear it over the ambient noise of the room. "We'll greet a few people first." "Who am I supposed to be tonight?" I asked. He glanced at me. "The same person you were 4 days ago." "I'm still figuring out who that is." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like the beginning of the thought of one, interrupted before it arrived. "You're doing better than you think," he said. And then we were approaching the first cluster of people, and the conversation was over. For the first 90 minutes, it went the way the dinner had gone. Controlled, manageable, nothing I couldn't navigate. I shook hands and said the right things, and laughed at the right moments and deflected personal questions with the particular practiced vagueness of someone who has decided that privacy is a personality trait. I stayed close to Woobin without crowding him, close enough that people registered us as a unit, without my needing to perform affection I didn't fully understand yet. I was actually starting to relax, which in retrospect was the moment I should have been most alert. I had drifted maybe 6 feet from Woobin. Someone had stopped him to speak privately, and I had stepped aside to give them space, and was reaching for a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray when a man appeared beside me. He was American, somewhere in his mid-50s, silver-haired and well-dressed in a way that was just slightly too deliberate. The kind of man who had learned to look trustworthy and practiced it long enough that it had become involuntary. He smiled at me with all his teeth. "Grace Kwan," he said, like he was tasting the name. "You're even more striking in person." I felt it immediately, that low, cold alarm that lives somewhere between the stomach and the chest. I had never met this man in my life. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice light. "Have we met?" "Not formally." He extended his hand. "Daniel Rice. I was a colleague of Marcus Lee's in a previous capacity." The sparkling water in my glass went very still. "Stay calm, stay calm, stay calm." I shook his hand, because not doing so would have been its own signal, and I kept my face arranged in polite blankness while my entire nervous system conducted a rapid and unhelpful inventory of every exit in the room. "Marcus," I said. "I heard he left the firm." "Abruptly," Rice agreed pleasantly. "These things happen." He picked up a glass from a tray as it passed, unhurried, comfortable, the posture of a man who had been in difficult conversations before and found them entertaining. "I heard you found something interesting before he left." "I process a lot of documents," I said. "It's a fairly routine job." He sipped his drink. "And now you're married to Woobin Kwan. That's quite a transition from routine." I looked at him steadily. I was aware, sharply, suddenly, of the exact distance between us and the exact distance between me and where Woobin was standing. I did not look toward Woobin. Looking would have told Rice something. "I'm lucky," I said simply. Rice smiled again. "You seem like a smart woman, Grace, so I'm going to be direct with you. Because I respect smart women." He lowered his voice by exactly the amount required to make the conversation feel private without being obvious. "Whatever you found in those files, whatever you think you understand about the situation, the person standing next to you is considerably more dangerous than the problem you were running from." I said nothing. In my experience, staying quiet in moments like this was almost always the right choice. Because people who want to unsettle you need a reaction to orient toward. And without one, they tend to keep talking and eventually say something they intended to keep to themselves. Rice kept talking. "He uses people, Grace. That's what he does. He finds someone in a vulnerable position, offers them a lifeline, and by the time they understand the cost of that lifeline, they're already... I think you have the wrong idea about my marriage, I said. I think you have the wrong idea about your husband. He said it gently, which was the most alarming version of the sentence. And then the air changed. I felt it before I saw it, that same underwater current shift from the entrance, but closer now, more concentrated. I didn't turn around. I watched Rice's face instead, which was far more informative. The pleasantness didn't leave it all at once. It drained, slowly, like something unplugged. Wubin was beside me. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak immediately. He simply stood at my left shoulder and looked at Daniel Rice with an expression so composed it had its own specific gravity. The silence lasted 4 seconds. I counted them. Daniel, Wubin said finally. Wubin. Rice had recovered something of his surface smoothness, but it was a thinner version now, applied hastily over something less steady underneath. I was just introducing myself to your wife. I know. 2 words, absolute and quiet. We're needed at the table. It wasn't said to Rice. It was said to me. His eyes moved to my face briefly, checking something, and whatever he found there made something in his jaw soften by a fraction. Of course, I said. His hand found the small of my back, and we moved away from Rice together. I didn't look back. I could feel Wubin's awareness directed behind us like something physical, a field, a current. And I understood without needing it. Explained that every step we took was being monitored by people in this room I hadn't identified. That Rice was being observed right now. That the entire encounter had been anticipated in ways I was only beginning to understand. We reached the table. We sat. Wubin poured water into my glass from the carafe at the center of the table. A small gesture, domestic and quiet. Then he set the carafe down and looked at me. He told you I was dangerous, he said. Not a question. Yes, I said. What did you think of that? I looked at him for a moment. His face was unreadable in the way it always was. But there was something underneath the surface tonight. Something slightly less settled than usual. And I wasn't sure, but I thought that my answer mattered to him. I thought he was telling me something true, I said, while using it for something dishonest. Wubin was quiet. People who actually want to help you don't introduce themselves by trying to destabilize you, I added. They weren't warning me. They were testing me. Another pause. Longer this time. Yes, he said. The dinner continued around us. Silverware against plates, low conversations, a string quartet somewhere I couldn't see. I ate without tasting much, and watched the room from the corner of my eye, and felt the strange dual awareness that had become the texture of my days. The performance of normalcy laid over a situation that was anything but. Rice left the gala 40 minutes later. I only knew because I saw the shift in Wubin's posture, so slight, so brief. The way a person breathes differently when something they've been holding releases. On the way home, the car was quiet again. The same configuration as before. Me on one side, him on the other, the city moving past. But something was different. Not in the space between us, exactly. In the quality of it. The silence felt less empty than it had before. Grace, he said. About 10 blocks from my building. Why didn't you look at me when he was speaking to you? I turned toward him. He was watching me with that steady, measuring attention, the kind that had been unnerving 3 weeks ago, and was becoming something I reached for without meaning to. Because looking at you would have told him I was afraid, I said, and being afraid would have made me seem like someone worth scaring. The streetlights moved across his face in sequence. He didn't respond right away. Where did you learn that? He asked. Growing up, I said simply. You learn to control your face when you're a black woman in predominantly white spaces. You learn not to give people the reaction they're looking for. It keeps you safe. The words came out more plainly than I intended, more real. I hadn't meant to say anything that personal to him. It felt like handing someone a piece of yourself without fully deciding to. He didn't respond immediately. When he did speak, his voice was slightly different than usual. Still measured, still quiet. But without the distance it normally carried. "That's a specific kind of exhaustion," he said. "Yes." I looked out the window. "It is." We didn't speak again before the car stopped. But when I reached for the door handle, his hand moved. Not grabbing, not stopping me. Just briefly, barely, his fingers touching the back of my hand before withdrawing. It lasted less than a second. I got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk while it pulled away and told myself it meant nothing. That it was incidental. That it was the kind of contact that happened between two people existing in close proximity for extended periods of time. I stood there in the cold November air for longer than I needed to before going inside. Upstairs, I sat on the bathroom floor. I had developed a habit of sitting on floors during emotional processing, something my therapist had once called grounding behavior, and which I mostly called the only place that felt honest, and looked at my hands. Wubin Kwan is dangerous. I knew that. I had known it from the first evening, had carried it like a stone in my coat pocket, heavy and present. What I was less prepared for was how that knowledge had started to exist alongside other things. The way he refilled my water glass, the book with the paper clips, the way he had stood at my shoulder without touching me and caused Daniel Rice to lose 3 inches of his confidence. He uses people. That's what Rice had said. But Rice had also tried to use me in a 5-minute conversation at a charity gala, using language about concern and honesty while watching my face for cracks. So Rice's assessment of other people's intentions was not a document I was willing to take at face value. What I couldn't stop thinking about was the touch. Less than a second. Fingers against the back of my hand. Nothing. Except it had felt like something. And the worst part, or maybe not the worst part, that was the problem, I wasn't sure anymore, was that I thought he had meant it to. I made a mistake in December. Not a catastrophic one. Not the kind that ends things or breaks things beyond repair. The small human kind. The kind that comes from forgetting, just for a moment, the exact shape of the situation you're living inside. It was a Sunday. Wubin had been in New York for 5 days on something he described only as business, which I had learned was the word he used for everything he didn't intend to explain. The apartment had been quiet in a way that had at first felt like relief, and by day 4 had started feeling like something else entirely. A specific, unsettling absence I wasn't ready to name. My friend Priya had been texting for 2 weeks. We had known each other since undergrad, had survived 3 apartments, and 1 terrible roommate, and the particular loyalty that forms between 2 people who have witnessed each other's worst decisions without flinching. She knew I had taken a leave from Hartwell. She knew I had, as I'd put it in a deliberately vague text, made some changes. She did not know the nature of those changes, because there was no version of that explanation I could give her safely. But she was persistent in the way only genuinely caring people are, and on Sunday morning she texted, "I'm in your neighborhood. Coffee. Don't say no." I said yes. I told myself it was fine. The threat, according to Wubin's people, and I had started thinking of them that way, his people, without examining what that implied about how I thought of him, had been redirected. Rice hadn't made contact again after the gala. 2 weeks had passed without incident, and it was coffee in a public cafe, 4 blocks from the building. I didn't tell Wubin I was going. That was the mistake. The cafe was warm and smelled like cinnamon and ground coffee, and the particular combination of a Chicago December seeping in every time the door opened. Priya was already there when I arrived, curled into a corner seat with her hands around a mug, and she looked at me the way only someone who has known you for a long time looks at you. assessing and fawned simultaneously, taking inventory. "You look different," she said, before I had even sat down. "Good different or bad different?" "I haven't decided." She pushed a latte across the table. "Talk." I laughed, and it came out more genuine than most of my laughs had been recently. Being with Priya was the closest thing I had to my actual life. The life that existed before blank marriage certificates and marble-floored galas, and a man whose silences had started to feel like full sentences. We talked for an hour. I told her nothing that mattered and everything that was safe, which amounted to a carefully edited version of my life that omitted the central fact of it. She talked about her work, her sister's new baby, the guy she was seeing who was either wonderful or terrible depending on which week you asked. It was so normal it almost hurt. I was pulling on my coat to leave when my phone buzzed. A message from a number I didn't recognize. "You should have stayed inside." The warmth of the cafe disappeared. I looked up from my phone and scanned the street through the window with the automatic, practiced calm I had been developing for weeks. Casual, unhurried, eyes moving without appearing to search. A black car parked across the street that I didn't think had been there when I arrived. A man at the corner not quite doing anything. "Grace?" Priya was watching me. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said. And then, because I could not explain and she could not know, "I have to go. I'm sorry. I'll call you this week." I hugged her quickly and walked out into the cold. I did not run. Running was information. I walked the 4 blocks at a pace that was purposeful without being hurried, my eyes forward, my phone in my hand, my thumb already finding the contact I had saved under a name that wasn't his, a precaution he had suggested, and I had implemented without fully believing I would ever need it. I typed, "Someone texted me." I went out. "I'm sorry." Walking back now. By the time I reached the building, my hands were shaking. Not from cold. I was inside for 6 minutes before my phone rang. "Are you in the apartment?" His voice was different. Not louder. Not angry. That would have almost been easier. Something to push against. It was quieter than usual, which in Wubin's specific register meant something I was only just learning to read. "Yes," I said. "I just got in." "Did anyone follow you into the building?" "No." "The doorman. He would have..." "The doorman is not equipped for everything." A pause. Not a breathing pause. A thinking one. "Show me the text." I forwarded it. 20 seconds of silence. "Stay away from the windows," he said. "Wubin." Grace. My name in that particular tone, compressed, careful, stopped me mid-sentence. "I'm not angry with you, but I need you to do what I'm asking for the next 2 hours. Can you do that?" I sat down on the kitchen floor. Old habit. "Yes." "Good." Another pause. "I'm coming back tonight." "You were supposed to be in New York until Tuesday." "I know." He hung up. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cold cabinet and looked at the ceiling and had a very honest conversation with myself about the fact that his first sentence had been, "Are you in the apartment?" and his last had been, "I'm coming back tonight," and that both of those things had settled something in my chest that had been unsettled for 2 weeks. This is a business arrangement, I told myself. He's protecting an investment, I told myself. Both of those things felt increasingly like sentences I was reciting, rather than believing. He arrived at 11:17 p.m. I had stopped pretending to read at around 9 and was sitting in the living room with the lights low, watching the river, when I heard the elevator. The guards took positions I had stopped noticing consciously, but registered anyway. And then the door opened, and Wubin was there in his coat, slightly colder than the apartment, and he looked at me across the room with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not the composure, not the measurement. Something underneath those things. something that had been pressed hard and was only now, in an unguarded moment, visible at the surface. He crossed the room, stopped in front of me. He took my face in his hands. It was so unexpected that I didn't react for a full second, just sat there while his palms rested against my jaw, his thumbs barely touching my cheekbones, and he looked at me the way he always looked at me, except with every layer of distance removed. "You're not hurt," he said. "I'm not hurt," I confirmed. He let out a breath through his nose. Slow, controlled. The kind of exhale that follows something held for a long time. He didn't move his hands. "I should have told you the situation was still active," he said. "I made an assumption about what you knew. That's on me." "I should have told you I was going out," I said. "I knew the rule. I stopped. Started again. I needed something normal. For an hour. I needed to feel like my life was still mine." He looked at me for a long moment. "I understand that," he said quietly. He said it like someone who understood it from the inside, not from observation. Like someone who knew exactly what it cost to live a life that belonged to a performance rather than to yourself. His hands dropped from my face. He sat on the low table across from me, not beside me, still keeping a measured distance, still Wubin. And the room settled around the two of us. The text came from someone connected to Rice, he said. "They were watching the cafe. They followed you 2 blocks and then stopped." A pause. "They stopped because my people were already there." I blinked. "Your people were already—" "You were never actually alone," he said. "Since the first week. There are always 2 of mine within visible distance when you leave this building." I opened my mouth. Closed it. "Were you going to tell me that?" I asked. "I told you I would protect you." "That's not the same as telling me I was being—" I stopped, searching for the right word. Followed felt wrong. Watched felt too heavy. "Accompanied," I said finally. Something shifted in his expression. "Does it bother you?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I admitted. "That's what bothers me about it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I should have told you." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have." It was the first time I had pushed back at him directly. Not deflected, not softened, but simply told him he was wrong about something specific. I felt the moment he registered it. That recalibration. Except this time it moved differently. Less like adjustment, and more like something approaching respect. "You're right," he said. 3 words. I suspected they cost him something. He stayed that night. Not in any way that requires explanation. He took the second bedroom, the one with the dress I'd borrowed for the gala still hanging where I'd put it back. But he stayed, and in the morning when I came out of my room at 6:30, he was already in the kitchen with coffee made, standing at the windows in a different shirt than the night before, looking at the river. He handed me a mug without being asked. I stood beside him at the window, and we watched the river together in the early gray light. And it was the most quietly domestic thing I had ever done with a man I had known for less than 2 months. And it felt alarmingly natural. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes." "The people who are after what Marcus took. How long until they stop looking at me?" He was quiet for a moment. "Rice is a middleman. The people above him are more patient, but also more rational. When there's nothing left to find, they redirect." He sipped his coffee. "I'm making it difficult for them to find anything. That takes time." "How much time?" "Months, probably." He glanced at me sideways. "Does that change something for you?" I looked at the river. A barge moved slowly through the gray water, unhurried, massive, indifferent to everything on the banks. "No," I said. And then, because he had said he wanted honesty, I was checking whether I was still counting down to an exit or not. Silence. "And?" he asked. I wrapped both hands around my mug. I'm not sure I am anymore, I said. That's the honest answer. He didn't respond right away. When he did, it wasn't with words. He just stood there beside me, close enough that our arms nearly touched, and looked out at the river and didn't move away. For Wubin, I was beginning to understand that was a complete sentence. 3 days later, an envelope arrived. Not through any of the usual channels, not dropped by one of his people, not sent to the building's mail system. Slipped under the apartment door sometime between 2 and 4 in the morning, according to the building's interior cameras, by a man whose face was angled away from every angle, inside. A photograph of me and Priya at the cafe, and a single line, printed cleanly. She doesn't know what her friend is. Does she need to find out? I sat with it in my hands for a long moment. My stomach was cold, and my mind was very, very quiet in the way it gets when something cuts through all the noise and leaves only the essential question. They weren't coming for me. They were going to use the people I loved. I called Wubin before I had finished the thought. He picked up on the first ring. There's a letter, I said, under the door. A pause. 1 second. 2. Don't touch it again, he said. I'm sending someone now. Then, quieter. Grace. I know, I said, before he could tell me to be calm, to sit down, to do whatever careful, practical thing he was about to instruct me toward. I know. You're not going to be able to protect her from a distance, he said. I know that too. Then you understand what I'm going to suggest. I looked at the photograph on the table. Priya's face, laughing at something I'd said, completely unaware, perfectly ordinary, everything I had been trying to hold on to. Tell me, I said. Priya took it better than I expected, which was either a testament to her character or evidence that I had dramatically underestimated how much she had already suspected something was wrong. I told her enough. Not everything. There were parts of this story I wasn't sure I fully understood myself, and handing someone a half-assembled picture of danger is almost worse than handing them nothing. But I told her about Marcus, about what I had found, about the people who had decided that knowing me made her a useful pressure point. I told her she needed to go stay with her sister in Philadelphia for a while. I told her I was sorry. She was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then she said, "Is the man you married keeping you safe?" I looked across the living room to where Wubin was standing in the kitchen doorway, far enough away to give me privacy, close enough that he would hear if anything changed in my voice. "Yes," I said. "Okay," Priya said. "Okay, I'll go." A pause. "Grace, when this is over, whatever this is, you're going to tell me everything." "Everything," I agreed. She left for Philadelphia the next morning. One of Wubin's people drove her to the station, which she did not know, and which I did not tell her, because some information is kindness withheld rather than deception. I tracked her train on my phone until it cleared the city limits, and then set the phone down and sat with the specific exhaustion of someone who has just done the right thing at a personal cost they haven't finished calculating yet. Wubin came and sat across from me. He didn't say anything immediately. He had a way of doing that, entering a silence instead of breaking it, letting it be what it was, rather than rushing to fill it with reassurance. I had found it unsettling at first. Now I found it one of the most honest things about him. "She's safe," he said after a while. "For now," I said. "For now is all any of us have," he said. Not philosophically, just factually, in the tone of someone who had spent years making decisions based on the realistic limits of what could be guaranteed. I looked at him. The morning light was flat and gray through the windows, and it made him look less guarded than usual. The sharp composition of his face slightly softened by the quality of the light. The tattoos at his throat. The hands folded loosely in front of him. "What happens next?" I asked. "Rice is being managed," he said. The people above him are in a difficult position. 2 of their accounts were frozen last week. The paper trail Marcus left is becoming a liability for them, not leverage. He paused. They're practical. When continuing costs more than stopping, they stop. And you know this because you made that happen. He didn't confirm or deny it. He didn't need to. How long? I asked. Days, he said, not weeks. I nodded slowly. Outside, the river was steel-colored and still. A gull landed on the railing of a building across the water and sat there doing nothing, just existing in the cold. Wubin, I said. When this is over. I stopped. Organized what I was trying to say into something honest. What does that mean for... I gestured vaguely at the space between us, which felt simultaneously inadequate and exactly accurate. He looked at me for a long moment. That depends on you, he said. It ended on a Thursday. Not with an explosion or a confrontation or any of the cinematic resolutions my nervous system had been quietly bracing for over the past several weeks. It ended the way most real things end, with paperwork, with logistics, with a phone call Wubin took in the other room that lasted 11 minutes and left him returning to the kitchen with the specific quality of stillness that meant something significant had shifted. It's done, he said. 2 words. I had learned to read the weight he put into small numbers of words. Rice? I asked. Gone from Chicago. The people above him have other problems now. He set his phone on the counter. You can contact your friend. You can go back to your life. A slight pause. A different version of it. I stood at the window and let that settle. A different version of it. My apartment in Logan Square had been sublet. One of his people had handled it quietly in the first week, an efficiency I had resented at the time, and now mostly understood. My position at Hartwell was gone, the firm having quietly restructured in the wake of Marcus's disappearance, in ways that were convenient for several people, and unfortunate for several others. I had, over the past 2 months, been unmade from my previous life with a thoroughness that was at least partially intentional and only partially reversible. I was 31 years old, and I had a new name and a law degree and a view of the Chicago River, and a marriage certificate in the kitchen drawer that I had taken out twice in the past month, for no fully rational reason. What does done mean for us? I asked. He was quiet. I turned from the window, He was looking at me with that expression I had catalogued over 2 months of careful observation, the one that existed in the narrow space between composure and something he hadn't decided whether to release. I had gotten better at reading it. I wasn't sure that had been his intention, but it had happened anyway, the way things happen between people who spend enough time in close quarters under enough pressure. The armor develops seams, and light gets in through them. I told you at the beginning, he said. When it ends, you have enough to start over wherever you choose. I remember, I said. That's not what I asked. A pause, longer than usual. Grace. I know what you're doing, I said. You're going to be careful. You're going to say the right thing, the responsible thing, the thing that gives me the most options and commits you to the least. I wasn't angry. I was just tired of the careful management of distance between us, which had been narrowing for weeks and which we had both been pretending not to notice. You can do that. That's your right. But I want you to know that I see it. He was very still. You see a lot, he said quietly. You gave me a lot to look at. The room held us both for a moment. Then he crossed it. He stopped in front of me. Closer than our careful arrangement had usually allowed in daylight with no social performance to justify proximity, and looked at me the way he had looked at me the night he came back from New York, except without the fear driving it, without urgency or crisis to use as cover. Just that. Just him, standing in front of me in the gray afternoon light, looking at me like I was something he had been trying to decide about for a long time, and had finally, quietly, decided. You came into my life because of a mistake someone else made, he said. Everything after that was meant to be temporary. I know, I said. I don't want it to be temporary. The words arrived so plainly, without ornamentation or preamble, that it took me a moment to fully receive them. That was his way. The most significant things always delivered in the fewest possible words, as if he rationed them according to importance, and the truly important things got distilled down to their essence. I looked up at him. Then don't make it temporary, I said. Something moved through his face. That barely visible seismic thing. The one that only happened when I'd said something that reached past the composure. His hand came up slowly and touched my jaw. Deliberate this time. Not the surprised instinct of the night he came back, but a conscious, chosen gesture. And he looked at me for a long moment, like someone who had spent a significant portion of his life keeping the world at a distance, and was now considering whether the architecture of that decision still made sense. He kissed me the way I had suspected he would do everything, without excess, without performance, with a quiet exactness that was somehow more overwhelming than anything loud would have been. When he pulled back, I kept my eyes closed for a second. Just one. You realize this is more complicated, I said. Everything worth having is, he said. I won't pretend the complications disappeared. They didn't. The world Wubin moved through didn't rearrange itself because two people had decided something in a quiet apartment on a gray Thursday afternoon. It remained what it had always been, intricate and pressured, and not particularly forgiving of sentiment. There were still guards in hallways and careful logistics, and a life that required a certain performance of normalcy stretched over something much less ordinary. But there was also this. He came home. Not to the apartment he had set up as a temporary arrangement for a practical problem. Home, with the specificity of someone who had made a decision about where that was. He moved through the space differently, left a book on the coffee table, kept a spare jacket on the back of a chair, stood at the kitchen windows in the morning with his coffee, and sometimes, not always, reached for my hand when I stood beside him. The small things. I had not expected the small things to be the thing that changed me. A month later, I started taking on consulting work. Contract legal analysis, remote. Nothing that required me to rebuild in an environment that had already proven unsafe. It was mine. My own income, my own hours, my own professional footing, rebuilt from scratch on ground that I had chosen this time. Wubin said nothing about it except to ask once, with what I was learning to recognize as genuine curiosity, whether I enjoyed it. I do, I said. Good, he said. And that was that. Priya came back from Philadelphia in January, and we met for coffee at a different cafe, one that I had chosen with slightly more awareness of sightlines and exits than I'd had in November, and I told her more than I had told her on the phone. Not everything. Maybe not ever everything, but enough. She listened with her hands around her mug, and her eyes doing that old fond inventory. Are you happy? She asked when I finished. I thought about it. I'm something more complicated than happy, I said. But it's mine. It actually feels like mine. She nodded like that made complete sense. One evening in February, I found the original note from the kitchen counter, the one from the first day in the apartment, with its clipped instructions and its complete absence of warmth. I had kept it without quite knowing why, folded in the back of the kitchen drawer behind the takeout menus and the spare keys. I read it again. Learn what you can about Korean business customs. If anyone asks, we met 2 years ago through mutual friends in New York. I thought about how foreign he had seemed to me then, how measured and opaque, how entirely illegible. I thought about how I had sat on the bathroom floor that first night and tried to list what I knew about him and come up with almost nothing. Now I could have told you how he took his coffee, how his breathing changed when he was thinking through something difficult, the particular silence he produced when he was angry versus the particular silence he produced when he was moved. I could have told you that he reread books rather than reading new ones, that he was meticulous about temperature in every room, that he had a habit of touching the back of his neck when he was uncertain about something, a gesture so small and unguarded that I was fairly certain he didn't know he did it. I folded the note and put it back in the drawer. That evening, Wubin came home late. I was at the kitchen island with my laptop and a glass of wine and the particular productive silence of an evening that belonged entirely to us. He came in, set his jacket over the chair, and stood for a moment looking at me the way he sometimes did, like he was checking something, confirming something, taking a quiet account of a fact that mattered to him. "Long day?" I asked. "Yes. There's food if you want it." He crossed to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, stood beside me. After a moment, without looking up from my screen, I shifted slightly on the stool, just enough, and his hand came to rest at the small of my back. Easy, unthought, like it had always belonged there. I kept working. He stood there in the quiet kitchen while the city moved outside our windows, and neither of us said anything else, and it was the most honest thing I had ever been part of. The marriage had started as a document in a courthouse drawer. I wasn't entirely sure when it had stopped being that, when the thing between us had crossed from performance into something neither of us had negotiated or planned or protected ourselves adequately against. But I knew what it was now. And when Wubin's hand pressed, almost imperceptibly, more firmly against my back, the smallest possible gesture, the kind only I would notice, the kind that said, "I know you're here," and that matters to me in the only language he'd ever been truly fluent in. I knew he knew it too. Some things don't need to be said, they just need to be kept.